The rebuilding morning sunlight spilled across the lake like molten gold. For the first time in months it was quiet again. No county vehicles, no HOA patrols, no paper signs fluttering with threats. Only wind, water, and the slow rhythm of birdsong. Ethan Cole stood where his cabin once stood, boots pressed into the soil that had been a battlefield. Now it was still, peaceful, free. 2 weeks earlier, the county's investigation had hit the Lakeshore HOA like a storm made of law and logic. Fines mounted faster than they could count. Unlicensed construction, forged documents, misuse of community. Funds, each violation stacked like a brick wall, closing in around the Marjorie. Benson's mansion, once the symbol of control, now bore an orange county seizure notice across its ornate. Yates' neighbors whispered as moving trucks arrived to carry away her furniture. Cameras from the local news station caught her standing on her porch, sunglasses hiding the tears she swore she'd never shed. In one clip, she tried to speak. "It's all a misunderstanding. We were protecting the community, but the law doesn't hear excuses, only evidence. When the dust settled, the HOA was dissolved. By unanimous county decision, all remaining assets were liquidated to repay damages and legal costs." Ethan received a letter 2 days later. "Property restitution approved. You are authorized to rebuild, with full exemption of permit fees and county support for damages incurred by unauthorized demolition." He read it 3 times before setting it gently on his desk. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't expected: closure, not triumph. Not vengeance, just the quiet satisfaction of balance restored. Construction began at dawn on the 1st of the month. No contractors this time, only Ethan, his tools, and the hum of his old pickup's radio playing soft blues. He worked methodically, plank by plank. Every nail he drove into the new frame echoed like a heartbeat, returning after long silence. Neighbors began to stop by, some apologetic, some curious. One older man brought coffee. Another offered extra paint. Even those who'd once turned away now nodded respectfully as they passed. And when a young couple asked what had really happened, Ethan only said, "Just a misunderstanding that went too far. But the law has a good memory. He didn't mention Marjorie. He didn't need to." One evening, as the new cabin neared completion, Ethan stood on his rebuilt deck, watching the lake swallow the sunset. The reflection of his cabin shimmered across the water, stronger now, larger, its roof crowned with a weather vane shaped like a phoenix. He leaned on the railing and smiled faintly. "Not bad," he murmured. "Not bad at all." His phone buzzed. An email notification. Subject line: County Update. Finalization of HOA case. He opened it. "Dear Inspector Cole, all charges have been processed. Mrs. Benson pleaded guilty to falsifying demolition documents and unlawful property interference. She has been sentenced to community service and restitution. Case closed." He stared at the words for a long moment, then shut off his phone. The screen went dark, and in its reflection he saw the calm surface of the lake, whole again. Later that night, Ethan took a small box from his truck and carried it to the end of the dock. Inside were fragments from the old cabin, a cracked mug, a piece of cedar, and a photograph of his father standing beside the original porch. He set them on the wood, lit a single match, and watched the flame dance. The smoke drifted upward, curling into the starlit sky. "This place has seen enough fire," he whispered. "Time for something new." When the flame died, he scattered the ashes into the lake. The ripples spread outward, gentle, endless. Weeks later, visitors to Lakeshore found a new sign by the edge of the property. "Welcome to Cole's Landing. Private property. County protected." It wasn't arrogance, it was permanence. The kind that couldn't be bulldozed, bribed, or threatened. And across the water, the once powerful HOA building stood empty, windows boarded, paint peeling, a monument to what happens when pride forgets its boundaries. On the final evening of summer, Ethan sat on his porch with a fresh mug of coffee. The crickets sang. The air smelled of pine and new wood. A friend from the county called. "So you finally rebuilding peace, huh?" Ethan chuckled softly. "Yeah, took them tearing it down for me to do it right," the friend laughed. "You planning to stay out there for good?" "Forever," he said simply. "No meetings, no committees. Just the lake, the stars, and silence." When the call ended, he set the phone aside and looked across the water one last time. Somewhere beyond the trees, the faint lights of the town glimmered, but here everything was still. He raised his mug toward the horizon, a silent toast. "To peace hard won," he said, "and to knowing when to stay quiet. Until it's time not to," the wind answered with a soft sigh through the pines, a promise that the storm was finally over. Epilogue. The inspector's lesson. Months later, a new homeowner moved near the lake. He asked the locals about the man in the cabin. They told him stories about an HOA that went too far, a cabin that fell, and a quiet inspector who rebuilt both justice and his home. The newcomer laughed. "Sounds like a legend." One old fisherman just smiled. "Maybe, but if you ever get a notice from the county, son, make sure you read who signed it." And there, in faded ink at the bottom of every official document, was the same steady name: Ethan Cole, county building inspector. They tore down his home. He rebuilt their empire's walls around them. Ethan stared at it, emotionless. The paper fluttered in the breeze. They had crossed the line. He took out his phone, recorded the sticker, and slowly peeled it off. Beneath it, he saw small drill holes in the wood. Someone had mounted it deep into the frame. Destruction of private property, he noted mentally. Tampering with county safety signage. Unauthorized enforcement. He looked out toward the lake. Across the water, he could see Marjorie's massive glass-front house on the opposite shore. She was outside, wine glass in hand, pretending not to see him. He waved. A slow, deliberate motion. She turned away. That afternoon, he received a text from an unknown number. "You were warned. Don't say we didn't give you a chance." He saved the number, traced it. It matched one of the HOA board members. He said nothing. Instead, he printed all the evidence, photos, messages, videos, and placed them neatly into a labeled binder. Then he wrote a report using his official county letterhead, though he didn't send it. Not yet. It wasn't time for paperwork. It was time to let them dig their own grave a little deeper. By the end of the month, the final notice came. Red-stamped, bold, and arrogant. Final warning: structure to be removed for non-compliance. Action scheduled for next week. Ethan read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, placed it in a plastic sleeve, and smiled to himself. "All right," he murmured. "Let's see how far you'll go." That evening, rain returned, heavy, relentless. Ethan sat by the window again, watching lightning ripple across the lake. The reflection of his half-finished cabin flickered in the water like a ghost. Fragile, uncertain, beautiful. He whispered softly, almost to the cabin itself. "Hang in there, old friend. They don't know who they're messing with." The thunder swallowed his words, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. The demolition. The lake was quiet the morning Ethan left. A thin fog rolled over the water, swallowing the opposite shore. He locked the cabin door, double-checked the generator, and loaded his truck. Just 3 days away, visiting his sister 2 towns over. As the truck rumbled down the gravel road, a few neighbors waved. Some looked away. Others just stared. He didn't notice the silver SUV parked at the corner, windows tinted, a camera lens glinting behind the glass. 3 days later, Ethan's tires crunched over the gravel again as the lake came into view. But something was wrong. He slowed the truck to a crawl. The outline of his cabin, the one he'd rebuilt with his own hands, was gone. Where the porch once stood, there was only splintered timber, twisted nails, and a burned outline of foundation. The wind blew through open space where walls should have been, carrying the scent of wet sawdust and oil. For a long minute, he didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't speak. Then he stepped out, boots sinking into mud and rubble. The earth was still fresh, tire marks from heavy machinery dug deep into the soil. His old cedar deck lay in pieces near the dock, crushed and half buried. He bent down, picked up a fragment of wood. His initials were carved faintly into it from years ago, the same piece he'd worked on his first weekend here. He held it for a long time, then whispered, "So this is how you want to play." At the edge of the clearing, a new sign stood like a tombstone. Property cleared. Per HOA enforcement order, your 441B unsafe structure, removed in accordance with community code. Ethan's jaw tightened. He ran his hand across the sign. The paint was fresh. His phone buzzed. A voicemail notification blinked. He pressed play. "Mr. Cole, this is Marjorie Benson, Lakeshore HOA President. We regret to inform you that your illegal structure was removed for community safety. If you wish to rebuild, please submit an application for approval. Have a pleasant day." Her voice was syrupy, fake, calm, almost proud. He didn't delete it. He replayed it once, twice. Each time the calm in her tone felt sharper. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile anyone would want to see. That evening he sat at the edge of the lake. The moonlight shimmered over the still water, reflecting the emptiness where his cabin once stood. His entire life here, the books, the photographs, his late father's tools, all gone. He took a slow breath. His reflection on the lake looked different, older, colder, something carved from patience and fire. He opened the black binder from his truck, HOA harassment, evidence log. He flipped through it. Page by page, photographs, timestamps, the demolition order, the text threats, and now pictures of the destroyed cabin. When the last page turned, he added a new one. Demolition of private property, 0913, performed without county permit. At the bottom, he signed it neatly, Inspector Ethan Cole, County Building Authority. The next morning, he didn't call the sheriff. He called the County Office of Code Enforcement. "Morning," he said calmly. "I need to report unauthorized demolition under county jurisdiction." "Address?" the clerk asked. "Lakeshore Community, Parcel 74B. There was silence. "Then, sir, that's outside any HOA enforcement zone." "Exactly," Ethan said quietly. "That's why this call is important." Within hours, he was at the county hall, wearing his badge for the first time in months. He filed the incident formally, including every recorded violation. And then he added one final note. "Request full audit of Lakeshore HOA for unlicensed demolition activity, code violations, and property interference." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You're asking for a full audit?" Ethan nodded once. "Yes, and I'll be overseeing it personally." 2 days later, the first county vehicles arrived at Lakeshore. White trucks with building and code enforcement logos parked at the HOA's manicured lawns. Inspectors with clipboards fanned out. Residents peeked from behind curtains, whispering. Marjorie Benson stormed out of her house, red-faced and indignant. "What is the meaning of this?" she barked. One inspector, young, nervous, gestured toward the man standing behind them. Ethan stepped forward. Dressed in a crisp shirt and badge, he looked nothing like the quiet man who used to fix his deck at sunrise. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Benson," he said coolly. "I'm here to conduct an official investigation into your association's recent activities." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You'll find," he continued, "that the county takes unlicensed demolition very seriously, especially when it involves destruction of property outside your authority." She recovered just enough to sneer. You can't do this. You're the one who broke the rules." Ethan's eyes hardened. "No, ma'am. I followed every one of them. You're the ones who didn't read them. By sunset, HOA files were confiscated. Contractors were questioned. County officers marked multiple sites for further review. And Marjorie, the self-proclaimed Queen of Lakeshore, watched as her empire began to crumble. Under the weight of real law, Ethan stood at the edge of his property that night, watching the lake again. The moon rose slow and silent, painting the ruins silver. He whispered, "Justice doesn't shout, Marjorie. It arrives quietly and never leaves." The wind carried the sound across the water, soft, certain, and final. The cabin by the lake. The lake was a mirror of the sky that morning, still silver and endless. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the dock, coffee mug steaming in the crisp air, and smiled for the first time in years. The cabin behind him wasn't much to look at. Peeling paint, uneven steps, a roof that sighed every time the wind passed. But it was his. He had spent the last 6 months restoring it by hand. Every plank he replaced, every nail he drove, felt like reclaiming a piece of peace that life had long denied him. Out here, far from city noise and fluorescent lights, he finally heard something he hadn't in years. Silence, or so he thought. The first time he met the HOA, he didn't even know they existed. A sharp knock rattled his door one Sunday afternoon. Outside stood a trio. A tall man in a polo shirt clutching a clipboard, a woman wearing too much perfume, and a third who smiled too wide. "Good afternoon. We're from the Lakeshore Community Homeowners Association," the woman chirped. "You must be the new owner of Lot 74. Ethan nodded. "That's right." "Ethan Cole. Well," she said, smiling like someone offering poison candy, "we wanted to welcome you. You'll find our community guidelines in this folder. All residents are required to comply." Ethan flipped through the packet. 47 pages of rules. Lawn height, fence color, exterior lighting brightness, even approved mailbox designs. He raised a brow. "Looks like a lot of regulations." "Oh, nothing too serious," she said sweetly. "Just to keep our neighborhood beautiful." When Ethan mentioned that his cabin sat outside their mapped boundary, her smile faltered for half a second. Then she said, "Well, you'll still need to follow our standards. We represent the whole lakeside area." Ethan had read his deed thoroughly. His property was county land, not part of their HOA zone. He didn't argue, though. He just smiled politely. "I'll keep that in mind." They left, heels crunching down his gravel drive, and he could feel the judgment hanging in the air long after they were gone. That night, he sat by the window, notebook open, jotting down the interaction. Old habit. Years of being a county building inspector had made him meticulous with documentation. But here he wasn't Inspector Cole. He was just Ethan, a man trying to live quietly by the water. He chuckled softly. Let's hope they stay harmless. But HOAs rarely did. A week later, a bright orange notice appeared on his mailbox. Notice of violation, unapproved exterior color. The color of your dwelling does not meet Lakeshore HOA community standards. You are required to repaint within 14 days or face penalties. Ethan stared at it in disbelief. The dwelling in question was a 100-year-old cabin that had been beige long before the HOA even existed. He took a deep breath, walked inside, and opened his file cabinet. He pulled out county property maps, zoning records, and the legal survey. His land, parcel 74B, was clearly marked outside the HOA boundary line. He drafted a polite email. To the Lakeshore HOA, my cabin lies outside HOA jurisdiction per county records, attached. I'm not, and never have been, a member of your association. Kindly update your records and refrain from sending further notices. He hit send and waited. For a while things were quiet again. The days were filled with the rhythm of work, sanding, painting, repairing. At night, the lake glowed under the moon like liquid glass. Ethan began to believe that maybe they'd realized their mistake. Then one morning, a car idled at the end of his drive. He stepped out to see Marjorie Benson, the HOA president, in oversized sunglasses, tapping her manicured nails on the steering wheel. "Mr. Cole," she said, stepping out. "We received your email. Unfortunately, your understanding is incorrect." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Incorrect?" "Yes," she said, eyes narrowing. "The Lakeshore HOA has jurisdiction over all properties with lake access. That includes yours. If you refuse to comply, we'll escalate to enforcement measures." He almost laughed. "Enforcement? Ma'am, you don't have jurisdiction here." "The county does. And I assure you, I've read every inch of that zoning map." Her tone sharpened. "You'll find that being difficult here won't get you far. We have ways of handling non-compliance." He met her stare with calm patience. "I'm sure you do. Then he turned and walked back toward his cabin, letting the screen door creak shut behind him. That night, thunder rolled over the lake. Rain hammered against the old windows, and somewhere in the darkness, Ethan saw headlights pass by his drive. Slow, watching, he stood by the window, arms crossed. They thought he was just a quiet man living alone by the lake. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Ethan Cole wasn't just a homeowner. He was the man who approved or shut down every construction permit in 3 counties. And for the first time in years, he smiled. Not the peaceful smile of a man who'd found serenity, but the cold, patient smile of a man preparing for war. Warnings and threats. Morning fog curled across the lake like smoke from an unseen fire. Ethan Cole stood on his porch, staring at the new sign staked into the gravel at the end of his drive. Notice, unauthorized construction. Subject to HOA review. It hadn't been there last night. He sipped his coffee slowly, the bitterness grounding him as his eyes traced the neat black letters. Underneath was a smaller print, Lakeshore HOA Enforcement Division. He didn't laugh, though part of him wanted to. The Enforcement Division was 3 retired men in golf caps and 2 women who loved gossip more than air. Still, it wasn't about the sign. It was about control. By noon, another letter arrived, hand-delivered this time. The envelope was ivory, sealed with the HOA crest like something from a royal decree. Inside, typed neatly, Violation number 237A, non-approved deck materials. You are in breach of community code regarding the use of untreated wood for external decking. Please replace your deck within 10 business days. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $1,200. Ethan leaned against the counter, rereading it. His deck was made of reclaimed cedar, treated, sealed, and inspected by the county itself. He set the paper down and opened his phone. He took photos, the sign, the envelope, the timestamp. Then he opened a new folder titled HOA Harassment, Evidence Log. He smiled slightly. Let's make it official. The next few days unfolded like a slow invasion. Trash cans overturned mysteriously. A truck delivering building materials was denied access to the community road. Someone poured sand into his mailbox. Every time, he recorded it, photos, videos, dates, names. He spoke little. But his silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. That Friday, while loading lumber near his shed, he heard footsteps crunching on gravel. Marjorie Benson stood there again, flanked by 2 HOA members, like she was a queen with her guards. Mr. Cole, she said crisply, we've received reports of unauthorized activity on your property. Ethan turned, resting a hand on the lumber pile. You mean me fixing my own cabin? She ignored the sarcasm. You've refused to comply with 3 violation notices. That's unacceptable. He wiped his hands with a rag and met her gaze calmly. Ma'am, I'll say this once more. This property isn't under your jurisdiction. It's county land. You have no legal authority here. Her lips curled. You can test that theory if you want. But our legal team has already drafted a removal order for non-compliant structures. Removal? Ethan said quietly. Yes, she said, chin raised proudly. Demolition, if necessary. Her lackeys shifted uncomfortably behind her. Even they seemed unsure about her confidence. Ethan tilted his head, expression unreadable. So you plan to destroy private property you don't own? Without county authorization? Marjorie smirked. When you joined this area, you accepted community governance. I didn't join, he said flatly. Her eyes glinted. Then you'll regret not doing so. After they left, Ethan stood alone by the water. The wind rippled across the lake, whispering through the reeds. He thought about calling the sheriff, but he knew small-town politics. The HOA donated to campaigns, hosted charity events, and smiled for the papers. They were the kind of people who thought rules were optional, because they wrote their own. But Ethan had something stronger than connections. He had patience. And authority they couldn't even imagine. A week later, things escalated. He woke one morning to find a large yellow sticker plastered across his front door. Condemned, structure unsafe, ordered for removal. Signed, Lakeshore HOA Enforcement Committee.